right, hey gang, quick announcement real quick. Quick announcement real quick, right? Yeah, so as you probably recall, John and I had said that we were going to take the show on the road, and we are. We were scheduled to go to Greenville, Texas, John, on August the 20th. There has
Yes,
been
sir.
a slight change in those plans. We are still going to Texas, but we're not going in August. John, we've had to reschedule till January.
That is the fact. Got a little medical issue with
Yeah.
the uh, the spouse of Seth,
Yes,
and
indeed.
family comes first. So
Indeed. Indeed.
got to shift things around. Unfortunately, we're both really bummed about that. We wanted to hang out with people in Greenville in August, but just not able to do that. And so we are working on figuring out what the new date is going to be and moving around our flight schedules and that kind of stuff. But our priority is to make sure that Heidi is doing good. So,
Absolutely. And just so everybody knows, it is a fairly serious operation that I will not share, but just suffice to say that I need to be there.
yep,
And it was rescheduled, and it happened to be rescheduled for the day that I was theoretically coming home from Greenville, Texas, and that just ain't gonna work. And I
yep,
want to say thank you to Ron and Skipper and Susan and all the people,
yep.
all the crew in Greenville. You guys have been amazing. I know we're kind of throwing you in a lurch, and I deeply apologize. But as John said, family comes first, and it is what it is. And they have been, all you guys have been so incredibly understanding. You're amazing. We love you guys, and we will come. We are coming, and we're
Yep.
working on a date, and we're kicking around, or they've kicked around a date in Jan, or dates in January, which frankly is better to go to Texas in January than August,
Yeah.
just for the temperature differential. But
Yeah.
hey, whatever.
Yeah.
It is what it is. But we are coming, but we didn't want anybody to go to, I mean, still go to Greenville for whatever they're going to do
Yes.
in August, but
Do
don't
what they're going
expect to
to do.
see us there because we ain't going to be there until the beginning of the year. So many apologies there, but tis what it
Got to do
is.
it.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, and on to the episode.
Hello, and welcome to episode 609 of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth Paridon, historian and deputy director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum. And with me, as always, on this June 9th, is my co-host, author, historian of a recently released book, John Parshall. How are you this fine, hot June day?
I am just peachy. I'm enjoying the parade of your animals in the background as your fat cat walked past in the hallway and
Mhm.
Gunther gave him a look of disgust and disdain. So yeah,
Yes.
I'm doing well. I'm in my decided to rock a little jungle fighting green today because it's that kind of an episode. So
It is.
yeah, yeah,
It is.
doing good. You can see my study is kind of a disaster area because I'm busily shipping books out and paying off those favors that I owe to people and blah blah blah. So, but other than
Yeah.
that, yeah, it's going good.
But that's a good thing, though. That's a
It is
good
a
thing.
good thing.
Yeah.
It is.
That
Yeah.
means the project is complete.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So cool. Let's do this thing.
Yeah, let's do this because this is so if you're watching this, um just how the sausage is made, I like to say last week we recorded an off the cuff episode that's actually long since already aired, is right after I broke this beast.
Yeah.
Um so this week we're piggybacking off of what aired last week, which is the efforts and the defenses of Second Corps or Two Corps, whatever,
Cool.
however you want to say it. This week, we're going to focus on the other side of the American line. It's going to be, or as I call them, I Corps, First Corps, Wainwright's people. And there's a lot to talk about here. There's some pretty interesting things that go on. So with that, let's
Yeah.
get into it. So while General Parker's Second Corps on the Abbey line was deflecting the initial attacks against them by the Japanese and eventually folding and retreating to the second line of defense, General Jonathan Wainwright's I Corps along the Maubon line was facing its own problems. Stronger in number than Parker's forces, Wainwright's men were simply exhausted, much more so than their counterparts on Bataan's east coast. These men, or elements thereof, had been in constant contact with the Japanese since the first landings on Luzon in the middle of December. Then named Northern Luzon Force, uh, had held the door open for Parker's men to escape entrapment and make their way to Bataan. The delaying action fought by Wainwright was brilliant, with the general known as Skinny seemingly always popping up on the front lines to manage and lead his poorly trained, if not determined, Filipino units. Now, in the middle of January, the situation had not changed very much. I Corps' men were still exhausted, as was their commanding general, responding to the threat that began to move towards him. Wainwright ordered his favorite troops, his cavalry, into action once more. The heroic fight around Morong and the later events known as the Battle of the Points were among the last bright spots, such as they were, for the men soon to be known as the battling bastards of Bataan.
Delay.
Ooh,
Yeah, so just to kind of orient people, last week we were talking about the events on the east coast of the Bataan Peninsula, and now we're going to be talking about the events on the west coast. And we have a little map here of Bataan in January that we will pop up just to kind of get people oriented. But what's kind of happening here too is that with the Americans having been driven back into the peninsula, there's this main lateral road that goes across the top of the peninsula from Hermosa through Layak and over to Olongapo. And that's allowing the Japanese to lateral troops across the top edge of the peninsula and get them astride the western coastal road and begin moving down towards Wainwright's folks on the west side of this peninsula. So that's what we're going to be talking about today is Wainwright and defending the West Coast.
so speaking of Wainwright, the units that he had, and they come and go, because they kind
Mm-hmm.
of share first corps, second corps, I corps, second, whatever, however the hell you want to say it, tomato, tomato. They share units here and there
Yeah.
at different points. But at this point in time, Wainwright has the first Philippine division, I'm sorry, 31st Division, 91st Division, what's left of it, and of
Mm-hmm.
course the 26th Cav.
What's left
Um,
of it? Yeah.
what's left of it, yeah, and they're about. I've seen different varying, and maybe you have numbers, John, that I don't, but I was seeing at this stage, their numbers are significantly less than they were, but they're around. If you take all of them in aggregate, they're about 400 and some change at this point. But there's only a couple complete units, and even then, they're not full strength.
Of the
So
cavalry you're
of the
talking.
Cav, yeah, the Cav.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. I think that's about what I've seen too. High 300s, low 400s, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, and
Yeah.
we're going to talk about them in a minute. We'll
Yeah.
get into deep. But
And then
go ahead.
I was just going to say that the first Philippine division, being the only sort of mainline regular division, is kind of acting as a bit of a floating reserve here. In that one of their regiments, the 57th Infantry, we've already talked about
Yes.
last week. They were the kind of the fire brigade over on the east side of Bataan, and now some of their regiments are going to be deployed here on the west side as well.
Yeah, that 57th Infantry, if you remember from last week, that's Sandy Neiningers unit. That's the first
Right,
Medal of Honor awarded during the war's Neiningers people, or he's
right.
part of 57th, I should say. So Wainwright's people held the line stretching from Maban on the west coast to Mount Natib. And we've talked about Mount Natib. That's the big
Volcano
fist right in the middle of
right
the
in the
friggin' line. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And so basically, you've got a line that stretches from one of the subsidiary peaks of Mount Natib, uh, named appropriately enough Bataan Peak, which is about 1,100 meters tall, and it stretches southwest down to the coastal road and is just north of the town of Malban. And so that is what is anchoring the Fil-American defenses in this area.
So let's talk about the Japanese.
Yeah.
I put in the notes that the force that's facing um, Wainwright is actually weaker than Second Corps, but you disagree, or the ones that are facing Second Corps, but you disagree. You think it's about even Steven?
About even Steven, but there's nuance there. First of all, I'm looking on my stupid map and realizing that I marked one of the regiments incorrectly. So um, on the left or the westernmost segment, you've got the 122nd Infantry Regiment, which is part of the 65th Brigade. And instead of 120th, it's actually the 20th Infantry Regiment, but that's a little bit deceiving because the 20th Infantry only has 3 battalions. First Battalion has not yet been brought up. Third Battalion is going to be attacking sort of on the interior portion of the line near Bataan Peak. And then the second battalion is being held in reserve. So that means that when these festivities kick off, we basically got a Japanese regiment, the 122nd, and a single battalion, three of the 20th, that is going to be on the attack here. So four maneuver battalions to start with.
So the Japanese general in charge of this particular offensive, because that's what it is a guy named Nara.
Yep.
How much do we know about Nara?
Off the top of my head, not a whole heck of a lot,
Yeah.
other than that he's the one who describes his own
Yeah.
unit as being basically the dregs of the Japanese army. That they scraped out of the flesh pots of Shanghai and loaded on a ship and brought over here. So, yeah, don't have much more information for you than that. Sorry, I failed.
He thinks well he and Homa think that Parker's force is the weaker of the two, and they are, and there's no
Yeah.
denying that. And he puts his main effort towards that area and a lesser effort towards Wainwright. But as we talked about last week, any breakthrough on either side
Yep.
would threaten either
Yep.
side. It would threaten both sides. So if they punch through Parker's people, it threatens Wainwright. If they punch through Wainwright, it
Yep.
threatens Parker, and so on and so on. So
Reason being that it'll leave a dangling flank on
right.
either of those two cores if the other one has to fall back. And so, yeah, that's the scoop there.
So the Japanese are going to launch their attack towards their mission is to move down that road that you just talked about, west towards Olongapo. And if I'm mispronouncing that, forgive
Yeah.
me.
And yes, that's right. And so that's sort of preliminary to this map that we popped up here. The first thing that's going to happen is yes, the Japanese have got to take Olangapo on the west coast near Subic Bay.
So as the Japanese are moving down this general vicinity, Wainwright gets word that a Japanese unit is indeed advancing down this road, and they're advancing down this road to this little town. And I've seen it listed in two different ways. Morong with a G
Mm-hmm.
and moron, lesson you are a moron. And
Right.
I'm not
Yeah.
100% sure which it is because I've seen it listed on both ways on two different army maps from World War
Yeah.
II. So which one it is, if Desiree, if you're listening, let us know. So
Let us know. That's right.
either way, Wainwright hears that these guys are moving towards Morong. We'll call it Morong because saying moron it seems a little flippant to me, but regardless.
Yep.
Um, he wants to get down there as obviously as fast as he can to blunt this assault, but the Japanese are also trying to get down there as fast as they can. And the colonel that's in charge of this assault is a guy named Watanabe. And he directs part of this 122nd Infantry Regiment that you talked about to get down the trail towards Morong as fast as they possibly can, obviously, while the rest of the regiment is embarked on boats. And we're going to talk about a lot about amphibious landings here in this episode, or semi-amphibious landings.
Yep.
Um, he'd hoped
The,
that, go ahead. Yeah,
I was just going to say the real time history. The Googles say that it is Morong. So
Morong. Yeah.
Morong.
I kind of figured as much, but like I said, World
Yeah.
War II maps are
Right.
take it with a grain of salt, if you will.
Yeah. Exactly.
So we'll call it Morong because I don't want to
Morong.
consider consistently call some village a moron.
Correct. I'm with you. Yep.
So anyhow, the Japanese are going to try and move down the coastline and they're going to try and basically leapfrog down there. We're going to talk a lot more about this because they do this again later on in the Battle of the
Hmm.
Points that we're going to refer to. He'd hoped that in this way, if he was to advance this way more rapidly down the west coast towards the town of Begak,
Hmm.
they would avoid the delay that was inevitable with the entire regiment coming down this trail that's about yay wide and all the
Yeah.
traffic jams that would ensue therein.
And it's a very sinuous road too. You can see it on this map that it kind of winds around the coastline there, and the terrain is also extremely steep. And so there are a number of areas where you've got all these kind of mountainy switchbacks and that kind of action going over ridges and whatnot. So yeah, it's much longer by foot than it is by the crow.
Yeah, and they do this operation relatively successfully. Elements of the 122 come ashore at the small barrio between Olongapo and Morong, and they march the rest of the way on foot. The two elements do join up on the 15th of January. Excuse me. And they're within a mile of the town of Morong. They cross the Batalan River just north of the village, and are only opposed by a very small amount of American rifle fire from an American patrol, actually, that Wainwright had sent to Morong, where, in preparation to meet the Japanese.
Mhm.
But Wainwright is not finished with sending people to Morong, as we're going to see. So let's get into what, as I put in the notes, is the end of an era, and it's kind of a romantic thing, but it's the end of an era, and of course we're talking about the United States Horse Cavalry.
Yep.
So, what's up with the First Infantry Division or the First Infantry?
So they are on actually the wrong side of the river at this point. They are on the wrong side of this the Bataan River, and so when the Japanese come down the road at them, they end up giving way in relatively short order and don't offer a heck of a lot of resistance. And so they pull back across that river, and their commanding officer is a gentleman named Fidel Segundo, and he decides that the location is not tenable from a defensive standpoint, and basically, despite Wainwright's order that he should hold it, Segundo goes ahead without orders and pulls back.
Yeah.
This does not make Jonathan Wainwright a happy man.
No, it does not. Because as we've said before, Skinny was, if he wasn't on the front line, he damn sure wasn't far from it. I mean, he was within, earshot of the gunfire. He was always close to the front line. And the story is when Segundo comes back, Wainwright, literally, he's baffled. He's like,
What are you
why
doing
are,
here?
why are you here?
Yeah, you're
And,
supposed to
and
be there.
yeah, you ain't supposed to be here, son. You're supposed to be over there. And Segundo basically says, hey, this wasn't a good position, so I pulled out.
Right.
And from several sources I've read, and I'm sure you've read the same, that there were some choice words that were
Mhm.
uttered by Jonathan Wainwright towards Segundo, and he basically just says, "I'm done with you. I, I
Right.
I don't have any patience for this kind of crap." And he immediately whirls around, and it just so happened that elements of his 26th Cav, which were his favorite unit, was right there, like literally within eye shot of these guys coming in. And he orders his 26th Cavalry to perform a mission of reconnaissance on Morong and recapture the village that he now assumes to be under Japanese control. Now, the 26th, we've talked about them literally since Jump Street, since day one.
Yep.
And as we said just a few minutes ago, they had been consolidated by the 16th of January into one unit. Excuse me, and they combined, and there were other units, and we can talk about that here in a bit, but the horse-mounted units have been consolidated down into one unit, combining both E and F troops into one group, while G troop is the other unit that's in relatively decent shape and still has their mounts. And that's key, is
Mm.
because by this time, as we know, well, actually, hell, when they get on the line, these guys are hungry.
Yeah.
And a lot of the horses, not all of them, but a lot of the horses at this time have already been slaughtered for meat.
Food.
However, E and F troops that are now 1 and G still retain their mounts. So um, he
And I've never really understood just how many troops are in a troop of cavalry. That's
at this stage, I don't know, and frankly I don't think it matters because
yeah.
they had these guys were the ones that still had their nags,
Yeah.
so it didn't. We're going to
My
see there's
sense
a couple hundred people that attack, but and we'll get into it. But
yeah, yeah. Anyway,
yeah,
I'm sure the nerderati will, immediately what, John, you didn't know? I mean, how many troops are in a troop? But yeah, well, I'm sure we'll get that information. In any case, total size of this outfit though is about, as we say, upper 300s, lower 400s, something like that.
and that includes the dismounted cav too. So
Right.
just so everybody's aware.
Yeah.
Regardless of this, G Troop, under a guy named Lieutenant Edwin Ramsey, has just returned from a recon patrol, and by just returned, I mean quite literally, like still
Yeah.
stepping off the horses
Right.
when
Yeah.
Wainwright sees them. So this guy Ramsey, and we're going to do an episode or two or more on the Philippine resistance. Remember the
Mm.
name Ramsey because he hangs around a while, shall we say.
Uh-huh.
He's an Illinois or was an Illinois native. He grew up in Kansas. He went to school at the Oklahoma Military Academy, enlisted in the United States Army in 1941, In February of that year, so I mean, this guy's fresh. In
Yeah,
February of that year, he's assigned to the 11th Cav in California. And when volunteers are called for to join the 26th Cav in Luzon, Ramsey's like, sounds good to me. Let's go. So he steps forward. He goes across the Pacific to Luzon, where he's inserted into the 26th Cav. It's
right,
kind of an interesting story here. So he was an avid polo player, and
right.
polo was kind of the in the late 30s, early 40s, and even before was kind of the game of the rich. And Ramsey
Yep,
was not
not.
a wealthy man. He wasn't destitute, but he wasn't
Yeah,
what you would envision a polo player being. Um, he'd played in the school, and he was absolutely obsessed with the sport. And the only reason that he went to the Philippines was because he'd heard that the 26 Cav had a really top-notch polo team. And he's
whole
like,
team.
that's it. That's what I
That's for
want to do.
that's for me, Jack. Well, yeah, that too, and again, pre-war service in the Philippines is a very plum assignment if you were in the U.S. Army, and good cost of living is a good posting. So even though war clouds were darkening,
Indeed.
he still stepped forward and came on over there. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And the polo player had played, Ramsey had played in the last polo match that had taken place in peacetime. And it was
pre-war, yeah,
like late November of 41. I don't remember the exact date. It doesn't matter. But Wainwright, the old Cav man, had
yeah,
umpired that game.
okay,
And he didn't know Ramsey, but he, as I put in the notes, he either knew of him or he physically recognized him and he remembered him from that game.
yeah,
And as Ramsey's getting off of his horse and like going to probably, catch a smoke and a break, he
yeah.
just whirls around and says, "You're Ramsey, aren't you?" And Ramsey says, "Yes, sir." And he says, and I quote, he says, quote, "You played in the polo match at Stotzenburg. You take the advance guard, move out." That's it. And Ramsey's like, I just
Uh,
I just got
Quasta,
here. I
man,
just,
yeah, right. I was hoping for a power bar and some Gatorade, and instead, you got none of that.
so the funny part, I mean, that's humorous, but Ramsey's CO, who we're going to talk about in a minute too, he tries to step in and like stand up for his boy and be like, this guy just got in, give him, let him
Yeah,
let him go take a whiz and get a cup of coffee.
right.
And he tells him that he's exhausted, and Wainwright immediately whirled around to his CO and says, "Yeah, well, we're all exhausted. Ramsey, move out." Doesn't want to hear
Not
it.
Doesn't want to hear it. Doesn't want to hear it. Well, and that I hate to say it, but
He's right.
he's right. You got time is the enemy here. You got to get up and you got to figure out what's going on at this village. So in any case, yeah, whether or not this assignment is going to turn out well or not, Ramsey's familiar with this terrain. He's been on this coastal road, literally minutes before, and he's been doing this for a few days. And so, yeah, he goes ahead and gets three squads from one of the platoons. He's got about 27 guys, and his CO, who's a guy named Wheeler, Major Wheeler, goes ahead and follows him with two more platoons worth of cavalry. So that to me suggests that you've got about 80 guys going up the trail here.
Yeah. Ramsey, spoiler alert, he survives the war and he writes a book. I think it's called Lieutenant Ramsey's War. I think is actually what
Okay.
it's called. And check it out. It's really, really interesting. But
Yeah.
he said that, and as we know, this is the dry season
Right.
on Luzon and Bataan, and in particular at this point. And he said that, just moving down the trails with the horses, the amount of
Baking hot.
dust that
Dust.
these animals kick up. And he said, he said that you could see it for, hundreds of yards away. And he
Right.
said, quote, "It was an invitation to an ambush,"
Sure.
unquote, because he was afraid that, they're going to see us coming and they're going to shoot the crap out of us.
Yeah. Yeah. What are
So
you going to do?
not a damn thing. Can't do anything.
Yeah. So he wisely gets to the outskirts of this village at Bagak and halts his column and gets, dismounts so that they can do a little reconnoitering here. Takes out his binoculars, and from what he can tell from the outside, the village appears to be deserted, and that there are three trails that are leading further south to Morong. Everything is quiet. The livestock is still penned. and the church seems to be shut tight. So, as far as he can tell, there's nobody in there, and he therefore directs his platoon to divide into a column of three and move down the center road of the village. And so they get out their 1911s, uh, their pistols, right?
Yeah.
Yep, and sent the scout element into the village to draw any fire if there is going to be fire, and they don't draw any fire. So at this point, he nudges his horse, which is a Bryn Arwen. What an interesting name for a horse, and trots into town.
Yeah. He gets into the town, into the village, and there's, like I said, or like you said, a handful of troopers already there. And
Yeah,
as soon as this guy walks into the village, boom, gunfire
mortars.
erupts from the other side of the village. And this isn't a
Yeah,
very big place anyway,
I'm sure
as
not.
do as do
Yeah,
mortars and clump, 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 clump around. Machine gun fire from the north of the village. Clearly, the Japanese have been watching them. And as he said, as an invitation to an ambush, and this kind of is,
hmm,
they knew he was coming. Behind the Japanese fire, there's like rice paddies and like low fields,
yeah,
empty thickets, things like that. And he can see, as he said, scores, quote unquote, of Japanese advancing on Morong and lines of skirmishers, which um, how they
yeah,
were advanced, it doesn't matter. But he sees numbers of Japanese coming towards the village. Behind these guys, he sees even more wading across these rice paddies in a small river in chest deep water. Under fire, Ramsey's point men come galloping back towards him because they see these Japanese as well, and you realize, hey,
sure,
we're 2 dozen guys here. We got a
yeah,
problem. He's aware, obviously, that the Japanese are advancing, and he's under orders, Ramsey is, to take and hold this village.
yes,
So while knowing that he can't defend anything right now because there's no time to set up a defensive line, he figures that the best thing to do is to do what cavalry does and charge. He issues orders for his platoon to form into what the cavalry called a forager formation, essentially a skirmish line full of men on horseback, where they're
right.
just going to run, literally just haul ass with their weapons at the ready and just shoot anything that moves. And that's precisely what they do. The lead elements charge through the village with the first group of 4 riders plowing straight into the recon element of the Japanese that are just now entering the outskirts of the town. And as I say in the notes, literally run into these Japanese with their horses, just
Which
pow, right
which is
into them.
hard to do because horses don't like to do that.
They do
That
not.
is they do
They do
not.
not.
That
They do
that is
not.
not their thing. But the result of that is that the Japanese are completely surprised and they turn around and run.
Mhm.
At that point, Ramsey brings up the rest of his troop and establishes 2 squads. You call them killing squads, and go through the village on foot and clear every hut in the town, killing several Japanese in the process. Uh, he doesn't take many casualties. He's got, 1 guy killed and 6 wounded in action out of the 27 or so that he brought in. So, yeah, he's got 20 combat effectives left at this point to now hold on to this place.
And that's not going to get it done.
No,
And he winds up setting up that line and trying to hold as long as he can. And he actually does deflect a couple of attacks. They do
yeah,
because they've got the better position. They do deflect, I think, at least 2, maybe 3 Japanese assaults on the village. The Cav
yeah,
fends them off. But the Japanese also realize that they have the advantage of indirect artillery fire, which the Americans do not, clearly, because they would have used
right.
it. And they start dropping mortars all in this village. And Ramsey's CO got that Major Wheeler that you talked about a minute ago. He comes in with reinforcements to help bolster the line for a bit. But as the mortar fire continues and the Japanese fire continues to grow in intensity,
Yep,
it's only a matter of time before they have to get out. They wind up holding the village through the rest of the evening, into the night, and into the next day. However, by that next day, the Japanese had returned in strength. And as to the strength, I'll be honest with you, I have no idea. I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't find it. and they wound up
Yeah.
pushing the Cav out of the village of Morong. And as I put in the notes, within days of Ramsey's charge, all of the horses of the 26th have been butchered for meat. And that is the very last American horse cavalry charge as we know it. And I know we've used horses in combat since in Afghanistan, but as we know of American, Wild West cavalry, that's
Yeah.
it. That is a dead
That's
foot.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I cannot even imagine what it must have been like to have to butcher their horses. I, given the bond that those men had with their mounts, yeah, that just had to be absolutely heartrending. But
From everything I've read, and I know, John McManus talked about this, I think with us, in that,
mhm,
to your point, these guys were, I mean, they didn't just, it wasn't like a pilot going to get into any plane that was running.
yeah,
It was their horse. Like
this is my
Bryn
horse.
Arwin was Ramsey's horse.
Yeah,
And he trusted that animal. You know how it is. I mean, and the animal trusted him, and it was like
yeah,
getting rid of your best friend, and that's just,
yeah.
yeah,
God awful.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely terrible.
Let's talk about Jose Calugas.
Jose Calugas. Yeah, this guy's he's pretty cool. He's a pretty
He
cool
is what
dude.
you would refer to, I believe, as bad man.
He is a bad, he is, indeed, he is a bad man. So if
Yes.
you when we were talking Sunday on the episode that, well, as you're watching this, has aired weeks ago, we were fishing for the name of the Filipino Medal of Honor recipient, and we couldn't
Hmm.
remember his name. Here
Here
we
he
go.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so this is the same cat who that if you refer to that episode I talked about, he joined the United States Army. He's a Filipino native from the barrio of Tagsing,
Mhm.
and he enlisted in the United States Army in 1930. As he said later, for better pay and steady food. Like, I mean, can't
That
blame
is
the
a
man.
great reason. Yeah,
Yeah, money and
absolutely.
chow.
Yes, please.
Cannot blame the dude one bit. So.
Yeah.
And I found this to be interesting when I wrote this in the notes, and it's I think it's pretty cool, really, is that instead of being one of these Filipino units that's trained, quote unquote, there in Luzon or wherever, he is shipped back to the United States after he joins the Army, the United States Army.
Hmm.
He's shipped back to the United States and is trained at Fort Sill and other
Hmm.
places too. He goes to other places too.
Oklahoma.
However, yeah, and he learns the trade of artillery from the United States Army. So he is a formally trained soldier. He's not,
Yeah.
some conscript. Like he knows what the hell he's doing. He's assigned to the 88th Field Artillery, 23rd Division Philippine Scouts,
Yeah.
who Kalugas is with. So on the
Yeah.
morning of
But by,
January 16th, what?
by
I'm sorry.
this time, though, he's working as a mess sergeant.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. Not a gunner.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's got an entirely different job at this point. So he's behind the lines and yet fairly near to his battery. Well, you say fairly near, but it's not really that fairly near. It's like about 1,000 yards. So it's half a mile or thereabout, a little more than. Um, and they begin coming under Japanese artillery and mortar fire. And during this time, one of the guns, and again, we're rocking these M1917 75 millimeter guns. It's a copy of the famous French 75, and one of these guns is silenced because the crew has been either killed or wounded by this artillery bombardment. And so, seeing that, Kalugas, without orders, just makes a beeline for the gun. So he runs across this field under fire about 1,000 yards to this weapon, gathers up a crew of men just kind of in an ad hoc fashion, and begins to then operate this gun and firing back.
Yeah. He does it for over an hour.
Right.
That he just randomly takes command of this weapon and starts dropping artillery on the Japanese, and he does it so effectively. As how many rounds he fired, I don't have a clue, but he does it so effectively that he pins the Japanese down and allows his parent unit to form a defensive line and repel a Japanese attack or three in the
Yeah.
process. So I mean, like what he did was valuable to that line of defense at that time.
Particular juncture. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And he is then recommended for and awarded the Medal of Honor. He would not receive it until 1945. He is the only Filipino to get the blue ribbon. So good on you, sir.
Yeah, and he didn't receive it until 1945. It wasn't one of those, retroactive things. It was just dude was in a POW camp, and he
It's
was
tough to get
released.
it to him. Yeah,
Yeah, kind of hard to give you the Medal of
yeah,
Honor when you're behind, you're in the Japanese stockade.
right.
But and this is something we can talk about when we get to that portion of this campaign, is that the Japanese actually let a lot of the native Filipinos go.
Hmm.
They released them from the POW camps, kept all the white boys in there, but they let the not all of them, but a lot of the Filipinos go, and Kalugas was one of them. And when he's released, they make him, like the Japanese make him basically sign an oath saying that they wouldn't take up arms against the Japanese. And he's like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
Whatever
Peace.
you say, bud. Peace. I'm out. And he goes home, and literally, like within 24 hours of him arriving back home, he's in a guerrilla unit killing Japanese. So it's like, yeah, yeah, that oath means nothing because I'm here to kill you because
Yeah,
you're on my
exactly.
property, you're on my home.
Yeah, yeah,
Goodness gracious. All right. Let's
yep,
talk about the roadblock. Now, this is something that we have talked about in the past, specifically on the Malay Peninsula.
yeah.
Let's talk about this roadblock because this is not an insignificant action.
Right. So what ends up happening on the morning of the 18th of January, General Kimura reaches the town of Morong and assumes control over operations for the assault against Wainwright's line, which is, along the coastline here and running up to Bataan Peak. So basically, what he's going to do is he's going to attack with the 122nd Regiment right down the coast road, and he's going to use the 3rd Battalion of the 20th Infantry to swing east through Morong and try to take the Americans in the flank, basically sneak through our lines and hit us. And they successfully do that. So this 3rd Battalion goes up the mountain and then comes back down and cuts the Pilar Bagak Road, and so it is not in on the initial actions. And as we mentioned previously, the 2nd Battalion of the 20th Infantry is being held in reserve. So yeah, this is a problem. I mean, this 3rd Battalion ends up getting astride this road and sets up uh, a roadblock, and basically overnight just turns this roadblock into an absolute festoon. It is mobbed with snipers. They managed to bring some anti-tank guns in there too, and some mines and stuff like that. And they just build this little hedgehog sitting right astride this road. This is a big problem because it means that the majority of the heavy equipment of the First Philippine Division, trucks and a lot of their arty and other heavy assets, are now on the
Cut off.
north side of this roadblock. And unless the Americans can clear this thing, they are not going to be able to get this equipment out if they are placed in a position where they have to withdraw. And of course, they're also fending off frontal attacks from the 122nd Regiment. So the situation is not good.
Yeah. Wainwright hears of, as he said, infiltrators,
Right.
Japanese infiltrators on the 20th, or around the 20th of January. And the reports that are getting to him say that the infiltrators, the Japanese, are in large numbers. Now,
Mm-hmm.
what the hell does that mean? He does not know. Um, but as you said, it's a significant issue. Wainwright realizes that this is a major problem, as any intelligent officer would, and has a desire to dislodge these people. But as we know, the Japanese, once they're sitting in a position, are not very obliging when it comes to getting the hell out of said position.
Yes.
And this is no different here.
This is absolutely no different. And so we are now experiencing sort of our first taste of what it's like to dislodge the Japanese army from a defensive position that they have taken up. And we've already talked about, this sort of behavior on the part of the Imperial Army. I mean, you've seen this kind of thing happen on a couple of occasions in Malaya. The same thing happens during the looping motion that is going to lead to the assault on Rangoon in Burma. Um, you've got the British Army that is just, landed the 63rd Brigade in Rangoon, and now they're trying to scoot north out of Rangoon and get north up country. They're under General Alexander, and they're scooting up the main highway there, and they run into one of these Japanese roadblocks, and they cannot get this roadblock out of the way. The Japanese are just absolutely obdurate on defense, and that's exactly what ends up happening here too. That Wainwright and his boys just cannot get rid of these dudes. They can't
And
get out.
and Skinny doesn't just send like, a couple of companies out there. I mean,
No,
he sends a fairly large force to break through this line. It is elements from the 91st Division, scouts from the 26th Cavalry, admittedly on Bren carriers now. They're using Bren carriers. They're
where the
just
hell they got those, I will never know. But yeah,
couldn't tell you. Couldn't
yeah,
tell you. But they got them. They don't have many of them, but they got them.
yeah.
They're using scouts from the 26th, Company C from the 194th Tank Battalion, what's left of it,
Mm-hmm.
are also ordered out to this area under the command of 92nd Infantry Regiment Commander Colonel Rodman. And I mean, it's not, you know, two companies of guys. I mean, it's a fairly decent sized unit that's
Yep.
being sent out to attack these people. That kicks off on the morning of the 22nd of January. The American tanks are trying to break through the roadblock and establish contact with the first division that's on the other side. And as you say, the Japanese by now have obstructed or constructed um, anti-tank ditches. They got AT guns up there. They got mines on the road, and it's the two lead element tanks go kablooey,
Yeah,
and the attack just stops right there. Boom, that's it.
right. Yeah. And you got to hand it to the Japanese at this point too, because any of that stuff that they brought up, they had to manhandle over
Yeah.
trails across this mountainous terrain. And this once again speaks to, we and the British sort of had this whole notion of, oh, well, that terrain is impassable. And really impassable is more a state of mind than anything else. And the Japanese are proving it here again. They're going to do this same sort of thing in New Guinea. So yeah, they managed to manhandle a couple of AT guns. They brought some mines in, and they're doing this all across, really crappy trails from their own lines. The problem for them is that they have not brought up enough in the way of water or rations or medicine. And it's the dusty season, it's the hot season. And so the Japanese are out under the sun in this stuff too. And they are really, really suffering from thirst and malnutrition. But as we discover over and over and over again in this war, that just doesn't really matter much to them. They suffer. That's just what they do.
And they take it. They just
They
take it
take
like
it.
few armies can. So during the next few days,
Yes.
Colonel Rodman attempts again and again to force these people out, first by frontal assaults, then by flanking attacks. Nothing works. They cannot get these people out of here by the 23rd.
Right.
No ground has been gained whatsoever. Later that day, on January 23rd, 1st Battalion, 2nd Constabulary. Now, what the hell is a constabulary? They're essentially police.
Yeah.
For lack of a better term, they're Filipino police. Not, walking the beat kind of guys, but they're Filipino law enforcement essentially for all
Yeah.
intents and purposes. Let's just call it that. Rodman employs these guys to launch an attack and outflank the Japanese and establish contact with 1st Division, 1st Philippine Division. These guys actually slip through the jungle south of the roadblock, and by nightfall, do make they they make their connection. They make their connection, and then without any explanation whatsoever. And these are, I mean, when you talk poorly trained, these guys are poorly trained.
Yeah.
Once they make contact, they pull out. They're gone. Like
Huh.
they just get the hell out, withdraw to their former position, and any ground that they have gained, which was a fairly decent amount, evaporates like that.
Right.
So the next morning,
Interesting.
yeah. I mean, they just completely useless, and God bless them, but completely useless. And we're going to talk
Right.
about them again here in a minute.
Yeah.
By the 24th go ahead.
I was just going to say, and you can see from the map here too that this roadblock is actually somewhat inland, because the main coastal road actually kind of loops in around there's a coastal promontory here. So, a single battalion of Japanese are not going to be able to control all of the terrain all the way down to the coastline, and that's why these constabulary troops were able to get in, and this is also why then the First Philippine Division is going to be able to get out. But the problem for them, as we mentioned, is that if that division makes the decision to withdraw, they're going to have to leave all of their heavy equipment behind.
And the green, this basically everything is just, nothing's getting through. Nothing's
Yeah,
working after all this. And the Green Books has this quote, and I want to read it verbatim, and it goes like this, and I quote, Rodman's inability to make progress against the roadblock could not have been due to a shortage of troops, as we said. I mean, this was not a small group of
right.
men that are thrown against us. By 24 January, he had under his command the 2nd Battalion, 92nd Infantry, 1st Battalion, 91st Infantry, 3rd Battalion, 72nd Infantry, 2nd Squadron, 26 Cav, two battalions and a howitzer company from the 2nd Constabulary attached to I Corps on 22nd January, as well as other mixed detachments. That's just a
Yeah,
fairly good sized group of people. All
yeah,
of these units, it must be added, were understrength, tired, poorly fed, and except for the 26 Cav, and the howitzer company had no automatic weapons at all, unquote, from Green Books. But still, that's a lot of humans.
yeah. It's a lot of humans, and you hate to say it, but this is one of those times when you just have to tip your hats to the Japanese and give them their due. I mean, they held any indigenous troops in utter contempt, and that is
You see it
being
right here.
it's being demonstrated here. There's a quote from H.P. Wilmot talking about this same action that nothing better illustrated the superiority of a Japanese unit over its American or Filipino counterpart at this stage of the war. That, yeah, once this roadblock is plunked down there, we just cannot deplunk it. We ain't got the tactics, we ain't got whatever it takes to get these guys out.
You got the question pops up in your mind. What would happen if this was 1944? Well, I can tell you.
We would
There,
win.
well, we'd win because we'd
Yeah,
we'd send about 10,000 artillery shells onto that roadblock and say, "Oh, there's
peace.
what? Where are they? All right,
Where are
everybody
they?
hunker down. We're going to send in the mail. Here it comes for the next
Yeah,
2 hours.
right.
And we're
Yeah,
just going to drown these people in 155s." And
yeah,
then you go through and you clean it out. But we
right.
we don't have that ability right now.
No.
So while the fight at the roadblock is still going, the Japanese are continuing to move, and they're not just focusing on this one. They're still doing their
Yeah, I
thing.
mean, First Philippine Division is still receiving frontal attacks from the 122nd Infantry Regiment during this entire time. So basically, that division has got an active enemy in its rear that is preventing its withdrawal and is facing a full regiment to its front. And so, yeah, after 4 days of that, they're just not in a position to really deal with this anymore. I mean, they're starting to crumble, and Wainwright recognizes that. And so on the 25th of January, then he reluctantly issues orders that the Philippine Division is going to have to withdraw that night. But again, that means that all their trucks, heavy guns, and other equipment that can't be carried out are going to have to be destroyed in place. Essentially what we're doing here is we are demotorizing and de-weaponizing this entire division, and this is the best division that we have on the peninsula. So
Yeah.
other than its 57th regiment, which is across the peninsula on the east side, yeah, basically everything that's left in this division is going to be walking from here on out.
Yeah. And it's at this point too, we talked about this kind of on the fringes. I forget how many weeks ago now, but a lot of the casualties that are sustained by Wainwright's First Corps when they're in the initial stages of withdrawal aren't actually battle casualties, but they're desertion.
Mm-hmm.
This starts to rear its ugly head again here.
Yeah,
Um, when these guys, the Filipinos that are in this first Philippine division, realize that the jig is up, they literally
yeah,
strip
some
off their uniforms, drop their weapons, and disappear. They
right.
disappear.
Yeah. So what's going to end up happening is the division and the men in it who want to retreat are going to take the same route that the constabulary troops took to make contact with them. They're going to loop to the south of the roadblock, closer to the coast, and they're going to make their way on jungle trails back to friendlier lines, and yeah, carrying any wounded along with them that they can manage to get out of there. So that ends up occurring on the night of the 25th.
Let's talk about well, let's put this in perspective at this point.
Because there's
So
lots of combat going on
there's a
all
lot to
during this
talk
time.
about here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what we're about to talk about, which is what's the Army classifies as the Battle of the Points, plural,
Hmm.
is a result of what is happening right now, or in the Japanese case, not happening.
Yeah.
Um, while they're successful, there's no question they're not as successful as they had as Homa wants them to be in terms
Yes.
of timetable. He
Yep.
needs to, as you said, what, 50 days, he's got to wrap this up, and they're beginning to push that mark. They're getting closer and closer to that mark.
Yep.
And he wants to wrap this up like yesterday. And
Yeah.
in order to do that, and he's not the only one, other Japanese commanders also feel that they can break through the American line, Fil-American line and wrap this campaign up quicker if they do a tried and true method of attack, which they've done previous, and not the least of which is just a couple weeks ago, is which is amphibious assaults, hooks behind the
Yep.
Fil-American line, and
Right.
that's what's happened here.
And the IJA love to do this. They had done this all down the west coast of Malaya as well. And so, yeah, even as early as January 14th, General Hama is telling General Naoki Kimura that he wants this thing to get wrapped up. And there's a remembrance here by Major Shoji Ota of 16th Division was present during a meeting when Hama says that he expressed his earnest desire to General Kimura to break the stalemate on the West Coast and instructed him to attack the enemy from land and also carry out a landing operation on the enemy's rear in order to ensure rapid success. So this is like a week before the combat that's happening here on the roadblock. And I should just state too that anybody who really wants a long, hefty read on this particular campaign, I would recommend John Whitman's Bataan, Our Last Ditch. It is extremely detailed. He was a former Army infantry officer himself, and it's I drew on it very heavily for my book. So anyway, that amphibious hook is not going to happen immediately. So just envision that we're in combat on the West Coast starting on about January 18th. Really kind of serious combat takes off on the 19th. This roadblock gets dropped, 20th or thereabouts. So the 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 elements on the West Coast here are not going to end up withdrawing until the 25th. But before that ends up happening, on the night of the 22nd, 23rd, the Japanese pull together some troops to do this amphibious hook. And they're going to be using that reserve battalion, the 2nd Battalion of the 20th Infantry Regiment. It's about 900 guys, and they are going to load them up onto amphibious craft and then move them down the West Coast.
They're going to try and put them, well, they're not going to try. They're going to put them
They're going to.
ashore on at three different locations. Um, if you look at a map, they're like these little fingers of land sticking
Yep.
out from the coast, and they're called the points. Or this point, and we'll get into the names of the actual points. But anyway, point being, no pun intended,
You
their
had to do that,
goal,
didn't you?
it did, because it was just a big grapefruit right there in front of
There
us.
it is. Yeah, right.
So anyway, the point is that they're trying to get back behind the lines and basically wreak havoc and end this campaign. So it becomes a relatively clear that the Fil-Americans are going to have an issue with these lines behind their lines because landings behind their lines, I'm sorry, because of the fact that, and keep this in mind, and this is important, is that the main Fil-American infantry units, the guys that have done the lion's share of the fighting, ain't there.
Yeah.
They're up at the front, and by the front, I'm talking, several miles away. So the people that are available for any kind of response for the most part, at least initially, are not infantry. They're airmen, they're sailors. There's a few Marines, and the Marines,
Yep. There's some
no
Marines,
surprise when the Marines get in there, they just, kick ass. But there's sailors, there's airmen, there's Philippine constabulary,
constabulary, I was going to
and
say.
and
Yeah.
it's just these are
Yeah.
not the guys that you want to try and repulse a Japanese landing, as we're going to see.
Right.
It's a
Yeah, and
mess.
again, and we should pop the map back up here too. You can kind of see in the southern part of the island, there are basically three core areas for the Americans. You've got one core over on the west part, two core on the east part, but then in the rear, there's this service command area, which is
Right.
headquartered down at the town of Marivelis. And so the Americans have at least considered the notion that the Japanese may try exactly this sort of thing. And therefore, there are little detachments that are kind of sprinkled along, the coastline here to just kind of keep a watch on any beaches that they can that might be good targets for a landing. And but then the question is going to be, can we bring up reinforcements on a timely basis and use them? That's going to be the issue.
Right. The
Yeah.
guy that's in charge of all this operation, that will be, is a gentleman in General McBride. He's the guy that's got all these units under his purview. And as I put in the notes, I said most of the units he had at his disposal at best knew how to go boom with a rifle. At worst, they had zero training for infantry fighting at
Yeah.
all. The airmen, in particular, had been given rudimentary training in the 2 weeks they'd been on the peninsula, and the sailors that were there had been given even less. The naval battalion that you spoke of a minute ago, it consisted of aviation ground crews left behind when Patrol Wing 10 flew south,
Yeah.
as well as sailors from the USS Canopus, men from the naval base at Marivelis, and from, as we said, the 40 to 50, 60 Marines of an artillery unit. Of that group, only the Gyrenes had any real knowledge of infantry weapons or tactics, because as we all know,
Right.
every Marine is a rifleman.
Yeah.
Weaponry was also a problem, though. We talked about ammunition, we got ammo at the wazoo, but the guns with which to kill these people, by and large, the ones that are actually worth a damn are with the frontline infantry. And back
Right.
here, there's significantly less frontline weaponry. That there's aircraft machine guns that are ripped out of wrecked
Yeah, I
planes.
was intrigued by that. That yeah, they're
Yeah,
all the planes are trashed by this point.
yeah.
There is a little airfield down in this neck of the woods, I seem to recall as well. I don't have it marked on my map, but yeah, we got nothing flying at this point, and
Nothing worth a
obviously
damn. Yeah,
nothing worth a damn. So yeah, there are numerous junked planes on that runway, but hey, the machine guns are still good. So we've got some of that sort of thing. We've got some Lewis guns, a handful of 1919s and 1917s, and an even smaller handful of BARs. So not much in the way of automatic weaponry and pretty light infantry kind of formations. So
on on January 22nd, Colonel Selleck, he's trying to gain more people to repulse any sort of landing that comes ashore. Um, the Japanese begin to come ashore at this time, and
23rd
it's
is when they start.
23rd. I'm sorry,
Yep.
23rd. My bad. I'm sorry about the wrong note or wrong date in the note. But the defecation hits the ventilation pretty damn fast because the troops that are there to respond to this, as we said, are few and far between. They're not very good. It's the 20th and 21st Pursuit Squadron, as well as the 3rd Battalion of the Philippine Constabulary Regiment, that are going to be on hand to answer the call in the first area of landing, which is at a place that I'm not even going to try and pronounce.
Long
Longo
Skawayan.
Scowen? It's
Yeah.
good. Gravy.
Skawayan. Yeah. And
Yeah. And
Desiree, I know, is hovering out there, waiting to correct our pronunciation. And I
and I'm
wait for
fine with that.
for her tender ministrations. Yes, exactly. So
Yeah.
the game plan had been for the Japanese that they wanted to put this entire battalion, about 900 guys, on one place, one point. But that is not what ends up happening on the night of the 23rd. So they load them out of the landing craft. They come tootling down here, and you can see from the map that They're loaded up in Morong. This is going to be about a 25 to 30 mile ride in those landing craft. It's pitch dark, and they end up, and they got, okay, so it's pitch dark. They got crappy maps. The coastline, of course, is completely blacked out. So, how do you recognize one point of land from another point of land? That's pretty tough. But the real kicker is that there's an American PT boat that gets into the action and is very pesky, sinks one of the landing craft, I believe, and succeeds in dispersing the others so that they basically are now broken up. And the end result is that two different Japanese forces get deposited in two different places on the night of 23 January.
Mhm. And they're first sighted at this long, well,
Longoskawayan.
there you go,
I'll just
point.
take that over. Longoskawayan. You just point at me. They're deposited at and just make the L
There you go.
Longoskawayan. There you
There
go.
you go.
All right.
This place is about 3,000 yards west of Mariveles Harbor, which is where what few supplies are left are stationed, as well as the backwater troops. So this is a problem.
Yeah.
And it's not until 0840 do we realize that the Japanese are even there because they're sighted and they're reported. But I have to say, with all, you got to give props where props are due. Commander Francis Bridget, who is obviously a sailor, he's commanding the naval battalion in the region, immediately dispatches troops to intercept these very Japanese. It's Marines and sailors, soon to be joined by the pursuit squadron men. These are fighter pilots and ground crew from the 71st. I mean, from the pursuit squadron, as well as some men from the 71st Division. And they get there PDQ. They get there pretty
Yeah.
fast. But as we know, things start to, kind of go south after the initial contact. When the initial contact is made, the sailors and the Marines and the pursuit squadron actually do put a hurting on the Japanese, but then the Japanese start to dig in and
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, what we want to do from our standpoint is just keep them hemmed up into this little peninsula that they have landed on. We do not want the Japanese to begin maneuvering in the interior and disappear into the brush and then show up unannounced at, one of our hospitals or something like that. So, the problem is that there's sort of a little mini mountain at the top of this headland, and when we get there, we find that the Japanese are already in possession of this little peak called Mount Pukat. And yeah, but we managed to attack them and managed to actually drive them off of those slopes and mop up some of their machine gun nests along those same slopes. The third pursuit squadron to the north suffered a few casualties the first day and ran into a Japanese patrol. But that means that when the sun rises on the morning of 24 January, unfortunately, we had given up those positions. We thought the Japanese were gone. Huh. And the Japanese have now reoccupied them, as is their wont.
Indeed.
Yes.
And now that they're in there, it's going to be harder than hell to try and get them back out of there. So as these Japanese are landing at these points, and there's two more points, but as we said just a few minutes ago, some of our initial counterattacks, if you will, do meet with some success.
Yeah.
However, as I said earlier, the troops that are performing these actions, God bless them for their bravery, but they are
Yes.
not infantry. They're not.
Yeah.
And there is a massive difference there. And not only do we know that as historians, so did the Japanese.
Yeah.
And the quotes, there's a quote in here which, I find to be humorous, but if you want to rip it, go ahead.
Yeah. So we capture a number of Japanese diaries after this particular action, and of course, the writers of these diaries did not survive. But one Japanese soldier recorded that they had observed among the Americans what he termed a new type of suicide squad dressed in brightly colored uniforms. Whenever these apparitions reached an open space, he wrote, they would attempt to draw Japanese fire by sitting down, talking loudly, and lighting cigarettes. The brightly colored part of this is because these units didn't have proper jungle uniforms, and they had been instructed to dye their uniforms green but in many cases, the dye that they ended up using, in some cases, I think they soaked them in gasoline to bleach them out. And so some of them ended up looking almost a bright yellow. So they were not, this was not good camouflage at all. But yeah, these troops are just greener than grass, and they've got crummy uniforms and nothing practically in the way of small arms. And so yeah, they didn't know what they're doing. And to the Japanese who are sitting in their dugouts or their caves or whatever, they're like, why are these guys sitting down 100 yards in front of us and having a smoke? It's crazy. Yeah,
Poorly trained, ill-equipped
indeed.
troops for the action. So they wound up pushing the Japanese, despite their ill training, to Lapeye Point. But once the Japanese get there, as we said just, a while back, the Japanese hunker down, and these guys, God bless them, ain't gonna dig the Japanese out of this point.
Yeah.
They need to bring in heavy weapons to finish the job. But even then, it takes a while for them to get these Japanese out of here. I mean, this is not anything that's just one and done. It's a series.
Yeah, yeah. Although it does bring us to some of the weapons that they ended up using in that. I don't know that we want to spoil that. But
We will get to that. We'll get
yeah,
to
we'll
that
get
because
to
it's
that.
pretty
Anyway,
cool.
okay.
Yeah.
Pray continue. Pray continue.
So at Quinawan, the Japanese land at a place called Quinawan. There's 600 or so Japanese from the 2nd Battalion, 20th, that land
Yep.
here.
This is the other main landing, and this one is significantly further north along the coast at Quinawan Point, and so they deposit the other 2/3 of this force, about 600 guys there. Um, the problem there for us is that this point is reasonably close to the main road, and as a result, if they can do the same thing that they've been doing further north and actually deposit some sort of a roadblock on that road, that could be very, very bad news. And so we want them out of there. Fortunately, we've got at least some elements from the 34th Pursuit Squadron. Some of our long suffering ground support men are there with some 50 caliber machine guns, but unfortunately for us, they fail to open fire.
Yeah, they didn't fail to operate. They just failed to pull the triggers on the
Shoot, yes.
weapons. Um, Philippine constabulary forces are then sent to engage, but by the time these guys reach the area, the Japanese had already dug in. And it's trying to get fleas off of a dog. It ain't going to happen. As I put in the notes, the policemen, because that's essentially what they are, they attack. They run into fierce Japanese opposition and are halted about 600 yards from the tip of the peninsula. The Americans, and by Americans, I mean American, pursuit or sailors or whatever, try to flank the Japanese. That is unsuccessful. And
Pretty
it's going to
pretty
be
tough to flank somebody on a
on
tiny
a
little
peninsula.
peninsula like this. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. The Americans, by the end of the day, reached the conclusion they were facing a reinforced battalion of about 700 Japanese. So they're not terribly
Not
far off the
yeah.
mark. And Colonel Selleck, who is in charge of this particular group, he realizes that the airmen and the sailors and the police officers ain't gonna get it done. And he requests tanks, artillery, and more infantry, quote, preferably Americans or scouts,
Mhm.
because he needs real trigger pullers to get in there and get this done. Um, Up on high on Corregidor, Dick Sutherland is seeing all this go down. That's Mac's chief of staff. He's seeing all this go down. He's seeing all the, comms back and forth, and he assumes that Selleck does not have control of the situation. And I kind of feel bad for Selleck in that he's forced to fight with, I wouldn't even call them second-rate troops. These are like third-rate troops, and I think the dude's doing the best he can with what
Yeah.
he's got. But it doesn't matter to Dick Sutherland. Nothing matters to Dick Sutherland except results, and he immediately.
Well, and I can sort of understand Sutherland and Mac's position on this in that
Sure, yeah. I mean,
the
it's a
balance of
bad
combat on
spot.
the front lines is also hanging in the balance. And we're facing a situation where if the Japanese can replicate a couple of more of these roadblocks much further south in our rear area, that could disrupt all of our logistics north to all of I Corps, which means that they might not be able to withdraw just to the rear battle position. The battle might be over at this
Mhm.
point. So yeah, there's a lot of combat happening simultaneously on this peninsula. Things are going badly for two corps as well, and so yeah, we need these rear areas to be mopped up for sure.
To that end, Selleck is relieved of his command right then and there by Sutherland, and Sutherland appoints former Colonel, now Brigadier General Clinton Pierce. If that name's familiar, he was the former commander of the 26th Cav when all this
Right.
started. Pierce gets into the situation. He learns of the poor results that have, you know, been achieved thus far, and immediately realizes, like, I gotta have infantry.
Yeah.
These sailors and airmen, bless their hearts, ain't getting it done. I gotta have real, honest to God infantry. He requests and receives 2 battalions of scouts from the 57th Infantry that are sent to his area, and they then begin to clear these
Right.
pockets.
Yes. Absolutely. So the first pocket, well, and we shouldn't call them the pockets because there's an actual later
Right.
battle
There is a
of the
battle of the
pockets.
pockets. Yeah.
This is technically speaking, this is the battle of the points. But the first point at Longaskawayan um, is going to be undertaken uh, by these infantry. But the other thing that we're going to introduce into this is Battery Geary, based on Corregidor. So the beautiful part of the southernmost Japanese incursion is that it is within artillery range of some of these enormous 12-inch mortars that we have on Corregidor.
These
And
are big girls too,
these are
man.
big honkers, yes. So Battery Geary is under the command of a guy named he's Captain Ben King of the 59th Coastal Artillery. They have 12 of these 8-inch mortars, and
Eight of the
the
12. Yeah,
excuse
backwards.
me, 8 of the 12-inch mortars, derp, and they have 670-pound high explosive projectiles that can barely reach out to this point. And I actually did measure this on Google Earth just to make sure that we were correct. So this particular shoot is at about a range of 14,000 yards, which is pert near the very tail end of the range of these mortars. But it does mean that we can bring this particular point into range, and we let go with basically everything we've got.
Everything we've got for, and this is not the only time this occurs, but this is one of the heaviest bombardments. Green Book stated that by the time all this is over, they fire upwards of 5,000 rounds. What are you going to save it for? What? Yeah, why save it? Let it go. Upwards of 5,000 rounds of these behemoths are
Yeah,
launched from these things. The Japanese quote that I pulled from the Green Books, I think is, well, this quote from the Green Books, and there's a Japanese quote too, is pretty good. And it says, quote, "This bombardment, the first hostile heavy caliber American coast artillery fire since the Civil
Civil
War,
War.
made a strong impression on the Japanese. One of them, the Japanese, later declared, quote, 'We were terrified. We could not see where the big shells or bombs were coming from. They seemed to be falling from the sky.'" And they were.
Because they were
Yeah,
extremely
damn
high
right.
trajectory weapons. Yeah,
"Before
yeah.
I was wounded, my head was going round and round, and I did not know what to do. Some of my companions jumped off the cliff to escape the terrible fire." Unquote.
Knock knock. Yeah,
Man
yeah.
alive,
It's
man.
it's bad stuff. So once we get Battery Geary into operation, and that's not the only artillery that we're using. We're also using some of the organic artillery that comes along with the 57th Regiment as well. So those guys now begin piling into those lines. Despite the barrage, however, the Japanese are doing what the Japanese always do, which is that they just will not give an inch in ground unless you actually can kill them. So we bring up 500 scouts, relieve the naval battalion, and launch an attack. By nightfall, two-thirds of the point had been retaken. Following morning, with the help of a minesweeper, the USS Quail, which was firing offshore, the scouts moved in and eliminated the remaining Japanese. The Fil-American forces suffered a grand total of 22 KIA, 66 wounded in action, and killed every one of the 300 Japanese who were on that peninsula.
That's not insignificant. I mean,
No.
22 dead and 66 wounded is not an insignificant number, in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And most of the casualties are suffered by the scouts, actually, because
Which are
they're,
irreplaceable,
well,
obviously.
and they're the ones getting in there digging these people out. So it makes sense that they suffer the highest casualties. So when the Japanese are pushed off of these 2 points, pushed off of this point, the battle for Quinnan Point, 7 miles to the north, continues. It continues to go on. By the 27th of January, the Japanese that had landed there had been contained, but much like it had been before, the fight had reached basically a stalemate. It was just locked in. 600 Japanese of Colonel Tsunehiro's 2nd Battalion, 20th Infantry had been attacked by Brigadier General Pierce's men now. And even though Pierce had the infantry to send against the 300 Japanese, he doesn't have the infantry to send against these
It's,
people right here yet. And
yeah.
it's similar results that had happened before. When he doesn't have
Well,
real infantry, the results just aren't what you want.
yeah, I mean, the bottom line is that he can only handle one of these points at a time. And it makes
Right.
sense that we'd be focusing on the southernmost of these points because it is the closest one to our absolutely crucial rear base at Miravelis. And we also benefit from Battery Geary doing fire support for us. So, of course, we're going to go after it first. But yeah, that means that the northernmost point is taking a while to grind out.
By the 29th, even though they have these, and just to give a brief overlook, the troops that are attacking that Quinnon Point are men from the 5th Interceptor Command, 21st and 34th Pursuit Squadrons, HQ of the 71st Division, 3rd Battalion, 1 Philippine Constabulary, and Company A, 803rd U.S. Engineers. And that's it. Um, 2 platoons from the 57th Infantry. These are actually infantry, these are scouts. They get in there on the 29th, launch an attack, and it goes absolutely nowhere. For
Right.
2 more days, the Japanese are basically just tied in tighter than a tick, and it just like banging your head against a concrete wall over
Yep.
and over and over again. By the beginning of February, however, the situation was much the same, but the Filipinos had started to take some significant casualties.
Right. And I was just going to say, again, for context, what has happened in the interim between the landing of these troops on the 23rd and, now fast forward to the 29th, we're still fighting down here on these points. Both 1 and 2 Corps have by now withdrawn to the rear battle position, and we'll talk about that in another episode. But it's hard to keep all these things, you know, in mind as to what's happening sequentially. The bottom line is that the forward combat forces are now secure on the rear battle position, but are now going to be facing up to a second wave of attacks against them. We'll talk about that. And meanwhile, all of this fighting is still happening behind
In
the
the rear,
lines
yeah.
on the points.
By the 4th of February, finally, using a tank attack, combined tank and infantry attack, along with artillery support, the Japanese holding up had been reduced to about 100 by 50-yard
Pocket,
pocket, pocket of
pocket on the
pocket
point.
of
Yeah,
people. Um, and this is, kind of a harbinger of things to come, knowing that the Japanese know that we ain't getting out of here.
yeah,
And I'll be damned if I surrender. They start jumping off the friggin' cliffs.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
exactly. And this is the first time that we've witnessed this kind of behavior too. That here we have this absolutely doomed enclave of troops, and they just will not give up, and yeah, would prefer to drown themselves rather than be taken alive. There were still some hiding in caves by the end of that action, and it would take a while to dig the remainder of them out. Wainwright notes that the old rules of war began to undergo a swift change in me. What had at first seemed a barbarous thought in the back of my mind now became less unsavory. I thought of General U.S. Grant's landmine at Petersburg and made up my mind. So, no longer really interested in taking these cats prisoners. We're just interested in killing them as rapidly as possible. And if we can do that using combat engineers and explosives, that's what we're going to do.
And that is precisely what they do. They start lowering shades of tulagi here, actually. They
Yeah,
start lowering 50-pound boxes of dynamite
Mhm.
into
On
these
ropes.
yeah,
Yeah,
near the entrances to these caves, and kaboom, they start blowing these suckers up, and or they send the boxes of dynamite in there and then chuck hand grenades in there to ignite the dynamite, and it's basically all along these cliff lines where these guys are just get sealed up in these caves, which, as we know, is what's going to happen time and again,
time and again.
yeah,
Yeah.
from 44 on to the end of the damn war.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
In the meantime, while all of this is going on, from the Japanese perspective, this battalion, the second battalion of the 20th Infantry, has just disappeared, and they have been getting some communications back. I don't know how. My sense is that there was, some nighttime infiltration along the coast and that kind of thing, but they make the decision that they want to basically try to double down here and relieve the 220th. And so what they're going to end up doing is bringing in the regiment's first battalion, which is, Johnny come lately to this particular fight. And so at midnight on the 26th, they end up loading the first battalion on landing craft and set out to try to reinforce this other battalion. They do not do well. Once again, poor seamanship, bad navigational charts lead the Japanese astray. And so they end up landing about 2,000 yards short of their final objective and deposit another. We're in disagreement on that as to how many come. It's between 200 and 600, and I'm not sure what the actual number is.
Yeah, that's a
Several
fair
hundred.
discrepancy. I mean, that's a big difference. It's probably somewhere in the middle, north of, closer to where your numbers are, because if you got 1,500 KIA,
Yeah, the
it's got to be more than
total.
200,
Right. Yeah. So the total body
obviously.
count between these two battalions is eventually going to be around 1,500. And seeing as how we landed around 900 in the initial attack, I'm saying it's about 600 that come ashore in this final effort here on the night of 27 January. And you can see that on the map as well, that they land a little bit north at on Yasan and Silium points.
Yeah, and the results after these people land is that Brigadier General Pierce, again, much like he did at Quinnon initially, he sends what troops he has at his hands, which are second verse, same as the first. It's
Yeah.
same as the first. It's 17th pursuit squadron in the Philippine Constabulary, and they go in and they do make their attacks, but they achieve absolutely nothing.
Right.
Scouts from the 45th Infantry arrived the next day, joined by elements of the 57th. By the end of that month,
Yep.
and they wind up reducing the Japanese pocket to a small group of people. Um, and they make the Japanese, before this is over, the Japanese make yet another landing.
Yeah.
And there's some questions here. I put in the notes this time with Hama's blessing, because you had said that Homa had made a remark earlier before any of this occurs that he wanted to do an end around, if you will.
Yeah.
Yet some of the Japanese officers who launched these attacks launched them theoretically without Homa giving
Yeah.
the giving
No,
the check.
that's an interesting point. And here's, yet another occasion when I wish that that the Philippine volume of Senshi Sosho had been translated, so we had a better sense of that. So yeah, I don't have an answer for you on that one. All I know
Yeah.
is that the bottom line is we now have the better part of two battalions here ashore.
Yeah. And when they get ashore, we do kill some of these people, obviously, and we retrieve some intelligence documents. Um, which, I mean, I'm assuming this had to have been on a you know headquarters man or something.
Yeah,
I don't know, but
right.
regardless of what it is, it gives the Americans, the Americans, an idea as to what the hell is going to occur here, and there are exactly four
Flyable
P-40s
P-40s.
left to take to the air. They do that. They get up in the air. They know that the Japanese are coming. They got a good idea of where they're coming from. The P-40s get in the air, find the Japanese landing barges, and shoot the ever-loving bejesus out of these things. Um, there are only a handful of barges actually remain afloat, and they make their way to the shore, and as soon as they come to the shore, they come under fire yet again from what remains of the 26 Cav and Battery D of the 88th Field Artillery and Battery E of the 301st. And these are 75s and 155s
Yeah, they
that
do have
start
some
letting go.
155s, older ones. Yeah.
Yeah. These guys fire, these two batteries fire a total of 1,000 rounds that night. Machine gun fire, and then small arms starts to root the Japanese out of their boats as they're coming ashore. And when they do get ashore, we start taking them out.
So that
This,
may actually be the reason for the discrepancy. How many of these guys ended up drowning or being killed before they even get ashore? I don't know.
I mean, there is no number. Nobody states how many numbers of barges were shot up by the P-40s.
Yeah,
They just say that they shot up barges from, and they destroyed them. So was it two or was
yeah,
it 12? Who knows? God knows.
yeah.
I have no idea. So,
Great.
yeah,
Yeah, I was just going to say, great quote from the Green Books on this. This is all taking place at night, but it's taking place during a full moon. So quote, for the Americans and Filipinos who witnessed the battle in the clear light of the full moon, it was a beautiful and heartening sight to see the remnants of the enemy flotilla, crippled and badly beaten, turn away and sail north shortly after midnight. Hama's plan to reinforce his troops on Quayanan Point had failed, and in the first flush of victory, the Americans believed the surviving Japanese had returned to Morong. However, there were, in fact, several hundred now ashore at this third point.
yep. And this,
Yeah.
again, third verse, same as the first two, and that
Yep.
these Japanese are going to hold in tight, and we're going to have to dig them out. Their commanding officer, Major Kimura, commander of the troops at Silayin Point, writes to General Morioka that a bitter battle was in progress, and it was for them, there's no question, and that the
Yeah.
enemy was attacking with tanks and artillery. The battalion, wrote Kimura, is about to die gloriously, quote, and essentially they do.
Yeah.
Um, the Japanese try and pull these guys out. They try and pull them out, and it
Yeah.
just it just doesn't happen because there's PT boats roaming the shore like friggin' sharks.
Yeah. Exactly. And so they are then given orders to swim out or to use rafts to withdraw to sea and then head north towards Morong any way they could. Unfortunately for them, uh, copies of these orders as well seem to have fallen into American hands. I do not know how, but that resulted in the fact that the troops in this area were alerted to the fact that the Japanese might be trying to break out. And so the riflemen along the shore then got valuable target practice firing at these Japanese swimmers and machine gunners. Were also on the watch for rafts and floats. And as you can imagine, the efforts to get out there were unavailing.
This doesn't surprise me at all because the Filipinos now, and these are scouts and these are constabulary and whomever, they're going in there and they're cleaning out what's left of these Japanese. And we'd said this multiple times, and it bears repeating that the IJA was not a friendly army.
No,
And even though they were there to liberate the Filipino fellow Asians from the yoke of the white Americans, they showed them no mercy at all. And, horrible, horrible, horrible atrocities and war crimes against the Filipinos. And this war gets down pretty damn quick to the Filipinos. And when it does, any Japanese that has to, falls in the hands of the Filipinos meets a very, 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 very
ugly
gruesome
end.
end. Yeah. And
Yep.
it's
Yeah, the scouts were definitely not having it at this point.
no.
And part of that is driven by the fact, as you note here, that the scouts in some cases had found the bodies of their own men, uh, behind Japanese lines, so mutilated as to discourage any generous impulse towards those Japanese unfortunate enough to fall into their hands. The Filipinos had found that the bodies of some of these soldiers had been bayoneted in the back while the men had had their arms wired behind them. One rotting body had been found strung up by the thumbs with the toes just touching the ground, mute evidence of a slow and tortured end. The Japanese army was horrible. And so, yeah, the Filipinos were not terribly inclined to take POWs if they could get them either.
No. And I mean, and you'll see that going into the Filipino resistance movement after all this goes
Yep,
down. I mean, there's
it's
no
extremely
quarter
bloody.
given,
No
no
quarter
quarter,
on
none.
either side, really. Yep.
So the 3-week battle for the points cost the Fil-Americans 70 killed in action and a further 100 wounded in action. One unit, 2nd Battalion, 45th Infantry, suffered 68 of the 70 killed.
Hmm.
Nearly all of the, as you put it, 1,500 Japanese, 900 in the original, and several hundred more who landed were killed. An estimated 34 survived. And they did take prisoners. There's pictures of these. Well, whether they're from the points or not, I don't know. But
Yeah.
there's pictures of Japanese prisoners on the Bataan Peninsula, under a
And I've
mark.
always wondered what happened to those prisoners once
I,
what the peninsula fell. I mean, did
I
they
don't think they.
live that long for the to be recaptured by their own army? I do not know. I've always kind of wondered that.
I would think that by the time all that goes down, April, almost said April 45, April 42, I think any inclination to keep enemy prisoners alive in any way, shape, or form when you're starving had long since gone out the window.
Yeah,
I would be willing to bet that once those pictures, and I'll show them here, of those guys was taken, they probably didn't have much longer for this world, if I was to guess, but I don't know
interesting.
for sure.
Yeah,
That's just my opinion. All right, so February 1st, 42, the Japanese have yet to meet their objective of crushing MacArthur's forces on the Bataan Peninsula. And
yeah,
for the Japanese, this was an absolute astonishing
yeah.
fact.
It's a real shocker for them. This is bad news for General Hama. He's being embarrassed here, as we'll talk about later on. His first attempts to sort of bum rush the rear battle position, spoiler alert, are not going to go well. And the part of the reason they don't go well is because of this amphibious operation that they pulled off. I mean, they've ended up squandering two full battalions of infantry in these operations. And as we'll talk about next time, things are really on a knife edge on the rear battle position. And this is a point that Wilmot makes as well, that if the Japanese had had, so much as an extra regiment of reserves, they probably would have caved in the Fil-American lines there. But because they've, thrown away these two battalions, they do not have those reserves available to them. So, yeah. On the other hand, um, for the Fil-American forces, they were, perhaps not surprised by their success, but they were certainly becoming increasingly dismayed by what they
Yes.
view as a lack of support from the U.S. And this goes all the way to the top. And, Douglas MacArthur, who the troops by now are beginning to call Dugout Doug, because he's over on Corregidor. He has only been over to Bataan one time during this entire fight, and I would suggest that he's suffering from depression at this point in time and is having a real difficult time sort of grappling with what his legacy is looking like in this particular campaign. He's also trying to lobby General Marshall and also Secretary of War Stimson to do everything they can to break the Japanese blockade. In MacArthur's words, he was professionally certain that this blockade could, quote, easily be pierced. But again, as we've discussed in previous episodes, when Marshall, is dangling bags of cash in front of the eyes of Australian tramp freighter captains, all of those dudes are like, "Thanks, no," know,
Yeah.
not really interested in trying to run that gauntlet because by this time, the Japanese campaign is far south of the Philippines itself. I mean, they're sort of in the middle range, working in Borneo and Celebes and those some of those islands. So it is a long way from Australia up to Bataan, and a lot of these freighter captains have no interest in doing that, and the few that do attempt it end up having rather short, glorious careers. Let's just say. So anyway, this kind of leads to I would say this is kind of the breaking point between MacArthur and the Navy. MacArthur feels abandoned, but he just does not understand kind of what's going on in terms of the strategic situation of the islands at this point. We just don't have any ability to get in here. The Japanese have total air and sea superiority.
His complete lack of understanding that, again, he had to have known by now the results of Pearl Harbor, even if he doesn't know
Yeah,
exactly which ship was sunk or whatever. By now, February 1st, 42, the man absolutely has to know that the U.S. Navy ain't coming
yeah,
because there's nothing with which to come. We can't send anything out there.
yeah,
And this goes back to a point we'd made a couple weeks ago, I think, in that, Mac is never wrong. And
right.
anything that happens on the negative side of this campaign, which there's quite a bit,
It's
none of
somebody
it is
else's
ever
fault.
exactly, none of it is ever MacArthur's fault. And the fact that he's not getting any supplies from the United States, even though admittedly George Marshall said, we're going to send you, this and that and the other stuff,
Yeah,
he's got to blame somebody, and he's looking at the guys in the blue jackets. He's looking at the U.S. Navy at that point,
yeah,
and he's got to blame somebody. But it goes back to my original point: is that he had to have known what had befallen the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor, and also, by the way, we're also fighting a war
yeah,
in the Atlantic as well. So, I mean, the Navy can only do so much with what it has, what little it has at this point.
yeah,
So
yeah.
he's grasping at
MacArthur,
straws. He's grasping
yeah,
at straws.
yeah, he really is, and he's making all these sort of wild prognostications too. He says that the Japanese at this point, their supply lines are badly overextended, that they're ripe for a devastating counterattack, waiting to build up strength before attacking the Japanese. And MacArthur's words would be, quote, a fatal mistake on the part of the Democratic allies. Uh, but for the more cool-headed observers that are sitting back in D.C., one of whom is Dwight Eisenhower, who used to be MacArthur's, one of his senior staff members. Dwight Eisenhower says that MacArthur's strategic visions were suited more to, quote, plebes at West Point than for real war. So, yeah, MacArthur is delusional at this point, is kind of what it comes down to. Sitting in a cave in Corregidor and really is kind of suffering from tunnel vision in the literal sense, and just yeah, he's a mess at this point. He's a depressive mess and is hemmed up in this cave and yeah, can't figure out how to get out of it. And the reality is that by this point, his entire command is doomed.
Oh yeah.
Um, there's just there every every man jack of this Fil-American force on both Bataan and Corregidor is going to be killed or captured, and there is not a blessed thing that anybody in Washington can do about it.
Nope. Nope. And I mean, I think again, I think we said this in a previous episode, is that he probably knew that, but he just never wanted to accept that
He
fact.
can't admit it to himself. Yeah,
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at the numbers, I can kind of understand. I mean, we've talked about, we had a significant manpower advantage over the Japanese. And if
long
you look,
term,
huh?
long term.
Right. And but if you look at
Oh,
the,
I mean, oh, sorry, sorry,
in
sorry.
the
Yes,
in the Philippines, yeah.
yeah, on the 10. No, you're right. You're
Yeah,
quite
it was
right.
like what
Yeah,
was it, like 3-1 or three and a half to one. It
damn,
was
yeah, pretty damn near.
significant. It was
Yes.
significant.
Sorry, I misunderstood what you were
No,
talking
no, no,
about in terms of
no, that's fine.
manpower. Yeah,
And he's sitting there looking at that, going, "Jesus, we got three times the amount of men." Even though in his mind he's saying he's being attacked by 100,000 Japanese, we know
500,000
that
troops.
not to be true. And I would say at this point he probably also believed that not to be true, but that's what he's saying it to, to hold up that face. But
Yeah,
you can understand how he's A, depressed, and B, at the same time, he's delusional. I think. I'm not taking up for the man. I'm just saying I can kind of get it. I kind of
yeah,
get where he's coming from here. So,
yeah. I mean, Eisenhower at this point has already made a briefing to Marshall. It was very cold-blooded, if you will, but he just cuts right through to the nub of the matter and says, okay, in the Pacific, we absolutely have to hold three places. We have to hold on to Hawaii. That's our main forward operating base.
sure.
We have to have the Panama Canal in order to be able to move reinforcements into the Pacific from the East Coast. That's non negotiable. And the other place that we're going to need to hold on to act as a springboard for an eventual counteroffensive is Australia. And so we are at this point in the war busily sprinkling, Marine defense battalions and regimental combat groups all along that line of islands running from Hawaii down south to Australia. That's where we're putting the majority of our beef at this point. There's nothing left for the Philippines at this point. And excuse me, Eisenhower tells Marshall directly that the Philippines just has to be written off.
Yeah.
There we are.
Cold-blooded, as we say,
Yep.
but there's nothing you can't supply people if you got nowhere to get it to them.
Yep.
So
That is the
even
deal.
if you have the supplies to send, you got to get them out there.
Yeah.
And,
Of course, nobody's let the troops on Bataan know
no,
that. There's
no.
not going to be any sort of an explicit mention of that. Although, when FDR does one of his fireside chats here in just a little bit, a lot of the men on Bataan are going to read between the lines.
Yep.
So
Yep.
we'll get to
Hence
that.
the battling bastards of
The
Bataan. No
Battling
mama, no
Bastards,
papa, no Uncle Sam.
Uncle Sam. Yep.
All right. You good?
Cool. I'm good.
Good.
You've been better,
It has
Mr.
been
Gimpy
better.
Hand.
I have been better. I got to tell you, I mean, aside from
Wow.
the obvious physical pain, just holding this stupid thing up like this, it looks like I have a consistent question. Like, oh, hey, let me ask, it's
Right.
really annoying. Really
Yeah.
annoying. So I wasn't trying to be a scene stealer, but it's,
It
whatever.
is what it is, man.
It is what it
Yeah.
is. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Just,
anyway, all right. We're good. I'm good if you're good.
I'm good, man. Get
All
out of
right,
here.
well, let's wrap it. All right, so with that, we want to thank you very much for listening and or watching this episode of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War. Give us a rating and review. We do appreciate it. If you got a comment, send it to unauthorizedpacificpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, my name is Seth Paridon, and I want to thank you very much for sitting with us and listening to this conversation. Hopefully, as we've said, and not to get off on a tangent, but hopefully we've enlightened a lot of people about what the Philippine campaign actually was.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more to it. We're not done by any means, but there was a lot more to it than just they landed, we surrendered, Bataan Death March. So
Right.
hopefully we're enlightening you to that fact. So anyway, all right, John.
And I'm John Parshall. Thank you to our long suffering audience for hanging out with us yet again, and we will see you all next week.